about
You want to start again?
okay,
It's not connecting.
okay, stop. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everybody. You have reached the Legal Aid of Arkansas's Facebook Live on Understanding IRS Collections. Welcome to our Facebook Live brought to you by Legal Aid of Arkansas. My name is Jennifer Gardiner, and I am the director of the Low Income Taxpayer Clinic at Legal Aid of Arkansas. I have with me Maceo Kirkland. He is the director of Legal Services of Alabama LITC. The LITCs all represent low-income taxpayers in their controversies with the IRS. We also educate taxpayers in their tax rights and responsibilities. If you have any question at any time during this brief presentation, please submit it in the chat and we will get an answer to you promptly. Breaking news. If you live in Arkansas, due to the floods and the tornadoes in early April of this year, the IRS extended disaster relief, that's what they call it, for 2024 income tax returns. This means that your new deadline to file your federal tax return is November 3rd, 2025 in the fall. And that means that no interest or penalties will apply as long as you file the return by that deadline. Now, because you live in Arkansas, you also probably need to file a state of Arkansas tax return, and they have extended the deadline, but only to July 31st. If you cannot file your tax return by July 31st, we strongly suggest that you file for an extension, and then you could file the tax return in August, September, or October. Best practice, of course, is to file now or as soon as you can. We are going to cover the entire field of IRS collections today in under 30 minutes. We're going to talk about how you get tax debt, getting notices, what you use, what the IRS uses as their tools, what your rights are, and how you respond to collections. And then what you can do, what your options are, and how we can help you if you can't exercise your options yourself. And make sure you do not fall victim to any kind of scam for somebody who says they're going to help you and might not actually do that. So, collections happens because you owe tax and you don't pay on time. So the IRS is going to try to collect that money from you because you owe it. They start right away this month by sending out notices to anybody who has filed a 2024 income tax return. They start sending the notices right now. This week are the very first notices saying you owe us tax because you filed a tax return and you didn't pay it. This is not the same as being audited, which is the IRS is questioning or doesn't agree with what you put on your tax return. And you probably have an idea about what an audit is. We're going to talk about collections. So, tax debt happens normally for most people, it happens because they file a tax return. Maybe there was a surprise when they filed the tax return and that they owed money and they couldn't pay and they don't send their check in. You don't have a tax debt if you send your check in by the deadline. But this is collections when you don't pay. You could have been under withholding of your taxes by your employer. Most times that happens when someone changes their filing status and doesn't bother telling their employer. As soon as you realize that the withholding's not quite right, you need to go back to payroll. Sometimes that's online, sometimes that's a person, and correct your withholding so that you're not under withheld and you don't end up with a tax debt on the filing deadline, which is normally April 15th. lots of people get surprised that they owe self-employment taxes because they're an independent contractor. That's on top of income taxes. And then later on in the process, sometimes the IRS notices that they disagree with what you report as your income, and that's called underreporting. And then they have it out with you, and then you end up owing money, and that's called underreporting, and you end up with a tax debt. That's later on in the process. So once you owe, essentially you don't pay by the deadline, penalties and interest start adding up. Those are two different things. Penalties for not paying on time, and interest is a standard rate that gets applied to the tax debt over time based on the balance. And because of these, both of these add up quickly. The sooner you pay any kind of debt, the lower your balance will be, of course, and the lower the penalties and the lower the interest. So the IRS has a package of notices that send out over time. Everybody gets confused about them. And we had a question that says, what should someone do if they get a letter from the IRS and don't understand it? Well, first, read it a few times, but then we're going to talk about how you respond to the IRS upcoming. But this first bill, we in our at the LITCs we call these soft notices. Even the CP 504, or that third notice that says it's the final notice, guess what? There's another final notice. So it's not the final notice. Um, they get, we may be increasingly serious, but they essentially are just reminders until the last one. And then you've hit the jackpot if you want to dispute the, um, the underlying, if you want to dispute how the IRS is handling your collection, you don't like it, you think you should be entitled to something else, some other alternative, you have a right to a hearing. Now, unfortunately, that letter only gives you 30 days. It's supposed to come by certified mail. It usually gets people's attention. And if you just write back and say, I want a hearing, you can explore all of those alternatives with an actual person on the other end. And we sort of like that one, but that comes way, way, way down the line. And at that point, you could owe quite a bit of money because it's taken so much time to get to that. So, Maceo,
Yes,
this is
thanks,
you.
Jennifer. Yeah,
What tools do the IRS have?
okay. Well, the IRS has several tools that they can use to collect whatever money that you owe, but first of all, I don't want anybody to panic about this. They just have these tools, but I'll tell you how to deal with them. Okay. For one thing, they can institute levies on whatever federal benefits you have. Now, many of us have to depend on federal benefits such as Social Security benefits, or perhaps unemployment, or perhaps veterans benefits, or some other kind of benefits in order to get by. And unfortunately, the IRS does have the power to levy those kind of benefits to collect what you owe in federal tax debt. You know, Another tool they have is they can garnish your wages. And
So, Maceo, sorry for the
yes,
interruption. We have a question, and it says, can the IRS really take money for your paycheck from your paycheck or bank account without going to court?
yes, I'm afraid they can. You see, the IRS is more powerful than any other creditor you can have. Because other creditors have to get a judgment against you before they can actually take money out of your paycheck or your bank account. You know, the IRS does not have to go through those hoops. All they have to do is just tell your bank or your employer to start forking it over. So unfortunately, they
But
do
that
have to
was
have,
that last notice, right?
yes, with the last notice.
Okay.
It takes the previous notices. It takes a while before it actually gets to this point. But once it gets to this point, they can do it.
Okay. So what is a federal tax lien?
A federal tax lien is basically the IRS announcing to the world its right to any property you have in order to protect its interest in whatever federal tax that you have. You know, basically, if you own anything such as real property, a lien can be placed at your local county probate court in order for the IRS to protect its right in whatever tax debt you have. Which does not mean that the IRS is going to seize your property. So no one needs to worry about that. All it means is that if you pursue some way of disposing of your property, such as selling it, that whatever you owe to the IRS must be paid out of the proceeds of that sale first. You know, and it,
How
it
long, how long does a lien last?
a lien usually lasts during the lifetime of the debt itself.
Okay.
Which means that if the debt is paid, you can then ask the IRS to remove its lien. Now if the debt is not paid, the debt must cease to exist within 10 years of the date it was first assessed. If the IRS does not collect the debt within that 10-year period, the debt simply expires, or what is called the CSET date. You know, and at that point you can ask for that for the lien to be removed.
Okay. So I was a little worried about the IRS taking their money, but as a taxpayer, I have some rights, right?
Yes, you do. You do have rights during the collections process, which is why I asked everyone not to panic. At the top of this, for one thing, you have the right to be informed, which means the IRS must notify you, about any potential collection activity that's coming, which means they have to send you those letters that were referred to earlier, to inform you during the process.
Oh, I have a point to make here, and we should
Yes,
have put it on the slide. You got to keep your address updated with the IRS.
absolutely. In order
They
for you,
can't inform you if they can't reach you.
yes, which is why it's important to make sure your address is up to date, usually by filing returns, you know, or if you're not filing returns, then make sure you send a form to the IRS to let them know, of your current address. You know, Either way, make sure the IRS knows where you are, so they can inform you as your right is to be informed. Now, another right that you have is you have the right to challenge the IRS. You don't simply have to lie down and take whatever they dish out. Okay. If you want to contest the IRS's determinations, you may do so in several ways. For one thing, what you can do, during the examination process, first of all, is ask to send the information, to make them reconsider whatever their examination was. You know, or during the collections process, you can send them information showing that you cannot pay what you owe, or that you should pay a lesser amount than what you owe. Now, if during this process, you have the right to be represented by counsel, or by an accountant, or by an enrolled agent. You have that right to retain counsel if you wish to, and the IRS must respect your counsel, or your accountant, or your enrolled agent, and communicate with them the same as they would with you, provided that person files the necessary authorization with the IRS by
But
way
not
of,
not your next door neighbor.
yes, not your next door neighbor. No, you know, no. You also have the right to request a special process called a collection due process hearing. That's whereby you are asking them to give you a hearing, usually by telephone, but it can be in person if you are near an IRS office, in order to explore your collection alternatives, such as an installment agreement, an offering compromise, or currently not collectible status if you cannot pay anything due to your financial hardship.
Okay, so we're going to respond to collections. That's the most important thing is don't just,
Absolutely. Please, people, if you receive a notice from the IRS, respond promptly. As we pointed out before, several notices will come. It is preferable that you respond to the first notice, but please, during the process, respond to some notice. Many people get scared, and so they just put it to the side because they don't want to deal with it. because too many people have these nightmare scenarios of the IRS dragging them off, like the Gestapo. No, it's not. They won't do that, right? You know, so review each notice and then act quickly with a plan in mind. Look at your financial situation and determine the best way to respond with a collection alternative. Remember the IRS will usually tell that you must pay something, but if your financial situation is such you can't pay anything, you can tell them that and then be prepared to verify that fact.
So, Maceo, what I hear from clients, from taxpayers who tell us, is that when they call collections, collections focuses immediately on them paying. And you're going to explain that they have to sort of argue back with their financial
Yes,
situation.
yes. And another thing about what collections do is they will try to push you into the alternative that will pay the entire tax that you owe. Now, the hard cold fact of the matter is that many Americans just can't pay the full tax debt they owe if they owe a whole lot of money. So don't allow collections to push you into a payment arrangement that you cannot afford. You know. Now, if you can afford a full payment arrangements, then by all means do so. If you can't afford that, it depends on what your financial situation is. You know, and you can full pay by way of this. You can put full pay by simply sending a payment for the full amount you owe, and tell them to have a nice day or something. um, or or you can enter into an installment agreement, provided that it's an installment agreement that you can afford to make. So be very careful because they're going to try to push you into an installment agreement that will fully pay the tax debt
But
within a
that's
certain.
if you, that, sorry, Maceo, but that's if you call, they're going to try to force you, but you could do it online.
Yes, yes, you can certainly do it online. I think most people prefer to call, but if you'd rather do it online, go right ahead. You can do it on our websites.
When I call and talk to the IRS about setting up installment agreements for my clients, they immediately remind me that there's a service fee. And the service fee is higher if you do it on the phone. So they're essentially saying self-help is cheaper.
Hmm.
But it's a lot of steps to go through when you do it yourself. So you got to be confident, you got to give it a try, and we can coach you with that.
Yes, yes. Whichever way would work for you, but I would certainly recommend the least expensive option of doing it. You know, Now, there are also many Americans who are among our low income citizens, and simply cannot afford to pay anything. And now in a situation like that, you have the right to request what is called a currently not collectible status, which is a temporary pause on collections. What you're telling the IRS is that due to your current financial condition, you can't afford to pay anything. And so you're asking them, to not require you to pay anything, to put a pause on collections. Now, if you can offer sufficient financial substantiation of your financial condition, they are required to do that by statute and also by their own internal revenue manual regulations. Now sometimes they may be difficult, in pursuing this option because that means they can't collect anything and you don't pay anything, but you have the right to request that. Now keep bear in mind, folks, it's supposed to be temporary. So if your financial condition improves at some point in the future, you would then be required to pay something. The IRS will be watching your income every year to see if it has improved, and if it has, they'll be contacting you again about making payment.
So this is the most common alternative that we use at the LITC.
Yes, remember.
That's it's CNC. And unfortunately, since we are skilled at it, we can do it, but often our clients can't do it themselves. And
True.
that's because the collection people are very skeptical about your ability to pay. And so they're going to talk you into making a payment when you're looking at your expenses and thinking, I can't make a payment. So sometimes we have people come to us who have failed that, and then we do it for them. But I definitely tell clients, and I'm sure you do too, don't get bullied by collections. Stick to your guns. If you can't pay, we'll figure out what to do. And then there's that next Really great option.
Ah, yes, the offering compromise. We do that we do that to a great extent in the LITCs as well. Now, this is a very complex procedure, but it can work out great for people. That's where you settle for less than you owe. It's usually designed for large tax debts, and basically it's a process whereby you are offering to settle your tax debt to a much lower amount that you then must pay off within either 5 months or 2 years. You know, Basically you provide the IRS with all the financial information you have pertaining to your life, your bank accounts, your property records, income, assets, such to show what your financial condition is, and you make an offer in light of what that condition is. You know, so if all of this amounts to pretty much nothing, then you can make a very low offer that you then pay off within 5 months or 2 years. You know, However, if your assets have some sort of equity in it and you have nothing by way of income, you must at least offer the value of whatever your assets are. You know, but it can work out for many people. For low income people, such as what we see in our clinics, we can make very low offers because low income people don't tend to have much. You know.
So, last on your list, Maceo, is the innocent spouse relief. And as I told you, we have it's for joint filers. It's basically a partial or entirely forgiving old debt for joint filers. But we have an entire presentation on that because of all
Mhm.
of these options, that one's the most complex
Yes, it is.
and the most difficult.
Yes, it is. Basically, what you're saying is that you filed jointly with your spouse, and there is a tax debt that's been assessed against both of you. And the tax debt really exists because of some action or inaction of your spouse. For which you did not know about or had no power to prevent. That makes you what's called an innocent spouse. And you can ask the IRS to relieve you of at least some of this tax debt, if not all of it. It
Right.
is a complex procedure. And if the IRS refuses to do so, it gives you the right to take them to federal court if they refuse to
So,
do so.
Maceo, when we're talking to taxpayers, we give them the whole list. I swear I talk about all of these every single day.
Hmm.
So sometimes people come and say, I want to do an offer, and I say, well, that's not the right thing for you. Or I want to do innocent spouse. So you really need to explore the circumstances of every taxpayer.
Hmm.
Very, very, very personal financial situation, and sometimes even more than financial, personal circumstances, so that we can make the right decision about which way to go.
Yeah.
So, how can we help? We can help you by representing you with the IRS. Maceo can in Alabama, and we do in Arkansas. We can represent you if you're contesting your liability. We can help you apply for one of these collection alternatives. We can appeal a decision the IRS has made. We can go, attend a CDP hearing. And what we do is we stand in your shoes and we communicate with the IRS on your behalf. And since we've done this over and over and over and over again, we know which methods work in how to get through to the IRS and be persuasive. We at the LITCs don't charge anything for our services. All you have to do is apply, tell us your story, and we'll figure out how you can help. But there are people out there who may take advantage of you because you have a debt.
Yep. Unfortunately, like in all other areas of life, you're going to have people to try to take advantage of your misfortune. Okay. And these are also tax scams. You know, Basically, you're going to have the unscrupulous people or entities contact you to try to trick you into paying them to resolve your tax matters when they have no intention of doing anything, are neither authorized to do anything, and probably aren't even tax professionals. You know, uh, Now one thing they like to do is to contact you and demand payment of your tax debt. By having you give them a gift card. that amount. The IRS will never do that. Contact you by phone, demand payment. They certainly won't take a gift card. Anybody that contacts you that way is a scammer. You know, and just like those kind of scams are usually affect other areas of life. They affect tax matters as well. So please just hang up. You know,
And
and,
Maceo, we had a question that said, what are some of the red flags that the helper might be a scam? And were you not telling me that someone got something through the mail?
yes. All right. One red flag is that they call you and they're very pushy and demanding. They might even threaten to send law enforcement for you if you don't make this payment. That's not the IRS people. They don't operate that way. Or they could also send you a notice. Some sort of notice from purporting to be from some government agency that doesn't exist. Like this is the Office of Tax Punishment or enforcement, something like that for such and such county. Something that looks official, and to the untrained eye, it looks like it's actually real. That's no real office. This is not medieval Europe where they come and drag you off to the dungeon for not paying the king's taxes. Okay, so don't be fooled or bamboozled by anything like that. You know, if you want to know if you actually got an actual notice from the IRS, you can verify it through irs.gov. Just log into your tax account to see whether or not that notice is actually for real. Or you can call the real IRS yourself, if you want to know. And please, folks, don't give out your personal information to these unsolicited callers, and they know how to make themselves sound official, and they'll trick you into giving them your social security number. And once they have that information, they can rip you off in all kinds of ways. So please don't do that. Question them if you have questions, question them closely. Or just hang up. If you don't trust the call. But like I said, it won't be the IRS because that's not the way they operate by just calling you out of the blue like that. So
Right.
please
And if
just
you have time, you can report these calls. Apparently, there are big databases full of phone numbers, but
mhm.
lots of times people, it doesn't even appear as a phone number on their phone, which is unfortunate, and then they can't even report where it came from.
Yes.
So don't respond to those kind of solicitations, and
Mhm.
instead, you can contact us. We had a question that says, well, we've already explained how do you support people going through collections. We can represent you, but we can also just advise you and give you some helpful hints for you to do it yourself. Anybody who calls us, we will talk to you. We do have income limits. We're pretty generous as to who we can actually take on as a client and go the full 9 yards. But we are happy to help advise anybody. We do get a lot of phone calls about scams and for people who don't qualify for our help. And we spend a lot of time explaining to them what they can do, what steps they can take. But we don't take them on as clients because they're high income taxpayers. So, thank you so much, Maceo. You're great. Thank you for considering all of our collection options. And join us for our next Facebook Live in June. We don't have a topic yet, but stay tuned. We'll advertise it.